Okay. Okay, everyone. I think we might be in business now. Sorry for the delay.
We believe people add value where their experiences are appreciated, when their talents are cultivated, and while their voices are uplifted as integral to the organization's culture, growth, and impact in society. We believe inclusive mindsets emerge from sharing diverse stories and experiences with compassion.
Okay, it still doesn't look like it's working. Hmm. Okay, let me ask a question. How long? Oh, I think we are live. Never mind.
Through human connection. Applying expertise with a history of leveraging DEI for innovation and engagement, our founder, Kelly Johnson, started the firm to be a disruptive agent for authentic workplace culture transformation. Charis derives from the Greek word meaning grace, goodwill, and kindness. Our name embodies the approach we use to create awareness about the transformative approach for diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Our purpose? To light the world to create transformative growth. Cares by KJE was founded by a belief that diversity, equity, accessibility, and inclusion are more than the right thing to do. Our strategic client partnerships, learning methodology, leadership development programs, and support for DEI initiatives incorporate this philosophy. With decades of experience, we yield proven results that elevate human connection and transform cultures. As a values-driven workplace culture firm, we empower organizations to succeed through care for their employees, customers, and communities. After all, it is the individual who transforms cultures, and cultures that transform the world.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for joining today's 24 Caris live stream to talk about leveraging resources strategically. For those of you who are on our events page, we hope you made it over to the right link, and apologize for all of the fabulous technical issues we've had this morning, afternoon. So thanks for your patience. Want to give a special thank you to our fantastic panelists who have carved out time on their day to really talk with us about how do we select the right DEI vendor? How do we, manage the strategic partnerships that we need to be successful in our organization? So let's do some quick introductions. And again, welcome. Thank you so much for joining. I'm Kelly Johnson. I'm the founder and CEO of Caris by KJE. We are a full service DEI strategy consulting and training firm based in Texas. Plano, Texas, to be specific. And I'm joined by some really smart and wonderful people. Let me do some quick introductions. First, we have Tiffany McCullough, who heads up supplier diversity for Amazon Web Services. We also have Angie Schwartz from Coca-Cola Southwest Beverages, gulp, gulp, sip, sip. And we also have Simeon Terry, who is the Senior Executive Leader of DEI for Austin Industries. And so please join me in welcoming them to today's conversation. Thanks again for being here, you all. All right, so let's dive in. And I'm going to talk a little bit about why in the world are we even hosting this conversation today as Caris, right? Well, why would Caris, as a DEI vendor, why would we want to host a conversation about how to leverage resources strategically? And it's a little bit of a twofold reason. So first, we recently hosted the Evolve conference for DEI and HR leaders, where we talked about the 5 R's that all DEI leaders need to create strategic and transformative impact in their organizations. Resources was just one of those 5 R's or 5 strategies. Give me a shout out if anyone was there at Evolve. So this is a part of follow-up to that conversation about those strategies that we need. But then number two, and more importantly, I think, after working with a number of DEI leaders, they have privately told me and told us at Caris that managing our vendors is a big part of our job, and it's not that glamorous. And sometimes it's not easy. We already have really limited teams, and we need our vendor partners to be sometimes an extension of our team. We call it our friends and family at Caris. So if you're a Caris client, you sort of become friends and family. And so we work so closely together. But what happens when those partnerships don't go well, or as planned? And how, as supplier partners like Caris, in particular, those certified diverse owned businesses, how do we be more effective partners? So this is an opportunity for all of us to learn from each other today. So without further ado, I want to get us started, and I'm going to go to you, Tiffany, first. But I think the first question is really this: how do we find the right partners? Like, what are the things that we should be thinking about, looking for? Because it's a big decision, not only from a financial spend standpoint, but time and energy and people resources. So why don't you get us started, and then we'll see what others have to say. How do we find the right partners?
Wow, that's a great question in so many spaces, Kelly, finding the right partner. So before I dive into my answer, let me just say all of my responses and perspective are based on my personal experience, not on behalf of my current or any previous employers. So really finding the right partner, I think it starts with being clear on what you're looking for. It's kind of like when you go to the store, you don't have a list, you're just roaming. Um, and unfortunately, you end up with a number of things that you did not intend to leave the store with and kind of forget what you went in there for in the first place, right? Also, I think sometimes we just look at the technical level. Okay, I'm looking for a DEI vendor that's great at, say, one of your strengths, Kelly, is educating, right? So that's on their resume, that's part of their statement of capabilities, but you have to look a little bit deeper into the soft skills of that DE&I vendor, because if they're going to be an extension of my organization, I need to make sure that they're able to deal with the other internal stakeholders that they're going to be engaged with, right? You stated it before we even got into the question. We're often limited on time and we're limited on staff, and I cannot micromanage someone. So I need someone with also high emotional intelligence. So I think we need to be very mindful asking those questions, or even looking at RFPs. I think an interview is important before RFP and after in selecting the right D&I vendor, and also involving some of the other stakeholders that will be working directly with them as well.
That's great. Angie, what would you add to that?
I would add that nothing beats face-to-face. Like, I know that we're all limited on time, but for me, it's very important to be out in the community and actually meeting vendors. So it's not going to be maybe the quickest way, but maybe the most fruitful way for me in my experience. I've attended quite a few events in Dallas. There's a lot of resources in Texas in general. The Women's Business Council, there's the DFW Minority Supplier Development Council. There are a lot of chambers. It's a great opportunity to not only network with the minority-owned companies, but also with the other corporations that participate in these events. And some of them have been a part of these groups for a long time. So you can get a lot of information and experience just talking to other corporations in this space. So that's what I would recommend.
I love that you touched on just the importance of the relationship building component, right? And I think, Tiffany, you and Angie both are starting to highlight that. Simeon, I'm going to come to you in a second. You obviously, Austin Industries is a part of the commercial construction space, and we've got a lot of industry diversity on this panel today. And so talk to us a little bit from your experience. What does it take to select and identify the right partner?
Thank you, Kelly. Well, I'm gonna come from a little bit different angle leading into my response, and my colleagues all gave excellent responses. I think that first of all, you have to inspect what you expect. And what I mean by that is understanding who you are and your relationship with your DEI partners or subcontractors. In other words, Are you doing this from a commitment standpoint or a compliance standpoint? Because it, depending on which side of the fence you are, it's going to be you're going to be viewed differently, and subsequently your relationship is going to take that course. At Austin, we are committed. So for us, and everybody that knows me knows I've got a buzzword, and the ladies have already talked about it, and that's relationships, relationships, relationships. We cultivate those relationships over time. So in our industry, obviously, there's a couple different levels. We have our contracting level in the field. And so we have vendor profiles that we go through, and obviously there's certain qualifications that they have to meet technically and things like that. But then there's at our joint venturing and partnering teaming level, where other firms are at risk as we go after major projects. And so you kind of in a marriage when you have a joint venture, because you sink or swim together. And so understanding those other firms' cultures, their how they've been perceived in in the industry, their relationship with other colleagues and businesses, DEI and non-DEI firms, because again, you're going to be locked at hip and step all the way together. So you want to make sure that culturally there's a fit within those firms and businesses. Does it fit our culture? Or those types of things that we believe in, and things that we don't tolerate. So I think that coming at it from that angle and perspective, and again, that takes time, because in our business we have millions and billions of dollar types of projects that we go after. So you want to make sure it's something, proposal comes out, you want to at least have some kind of understanding way prior to that before you want to sit down. And then there's some particular projects there's a fit and some there's not. So again, I think turning from inside, how are we set up culturally, and then does that line up with others that we want to do business with? Because again, if you aren't aligned culturally, if you're not committed, you got somebody who's coming from a compliance standpoint, at some point in time, the rubber's going to meet the road, and you're going to have some serious conversations. So that's kind of our approach that we go about.
I think that's so important. Thank you, Simeon, because to me, you're highlighting the importance of organizational values, right? And do the values of the potential partner, do they align with your own organizational values? But that has to go beyond what's on a website, right? We can all have adjectives or nouns on a website of what our values are, but are those values, are those qualities embodied in the interactions that you have, which sort of goes to what Angie was saying, right? When you see kind of see those values in action. So a little bit of spoiler. So one of the CARES values is being resilient. I was certainly tapping into resiliency with our technical issues today. So hopefully I kind of passed the test, or I was living our values of resiliency, because that was very frustrating, but I appreciate, again, y'all's patience. So let's talk about, some of you have talked, so I think Tiffany talked a little bit about like the resume, like what's on paper. Angie highlighted the relationship building process and it needing to be sometimes more than just virtual. And then Simeon, you've touched on aligning to values, and are you really committed, or is this just compliance? So let's dig a little bit deeper and let's talk about the steps or the mechanics of a vetting process. So what are those best practices? Some of them are probably standard, but what are those that you believe are really game changers, really critical, i.e. don't skip this step? What advice would you give us in terms of the vetting process when you are selecting a vendor? And Angie, I'm going to come to you first.
Okay, thank you, Kelly. So pretty standard, I would say, is to ask a lot of questions. This is something I do with all my vendors. I want to know who their clients are. I want to know what their current projects are. I want to know what their industry experience is. So that's something I touch basically. But then a lot of times I also will ask for a referral. Is there another company you're working with? And I'll want to touch base with that company just to see if they executed correctly on the project. I'll also reach out to other corporations that might be in my industry just to see if they have any recommendations or any feedback. But basically very upfront with my expectations, just what we need as a company, what our policies are, so that they know from the very beginning what we are expecting from them. Thank you.
Yeah, Simeon, what would you add to that vetting process, best practices, and then Tiffany will come to you.
I think probably within that too, it's just, really in an overall process, right? To say, just kind of doing your homework, understanding, what are others within the industry that you've worked with? What are they saying about you? Are there from your, and I guess one of our core values at Austin is integrity. So, do you have, what's your history in the industry? Do you have claims, a lot of legal issues, certain clients and different things like that? But then the other thing is, I always like to do what I call a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And I think it goes both ways, because this is one of the things that and again, I had to learn some things over the years, is doing that process. It's a two-way avenue, because a lot of times for DEI businesses, and this is going from those that have talked to me always, it's always like they're the ones that have to be beholden to the primes or those who want them. And sometimes, and I tell them now, it's like, hey, you need to do a SWOT analysis on us. Are we a right fit for you as well? Because just because you are a DEI or small business or woman-owned or minority, whatever that may be, doesn't make you any less. You still have to do the same things, maybe on a smaller scale, but at the end of the day, you've got to provide business and things for people that work for you. You have people that work for you that rely on you to make sound business decisions so that they can come to work, they can fulfill their job, get their paycheck, and take care of their families just like anybody else. So that's probably one of the key things, is having that conversation and making sure that, hey, while we're going to, do our due diligence, you need to do your due diligence on us. And then let's have that conversation and let's see your core values, the things that are important to you in in our case, a contractor or a joint venture partner, if it's at that top level, so that there's synergy going both ways. Not, okay, well, we're going to select you because, quiet as it's kept, you don't have to accept, right? If we don't fit into your values, and we want to make sure that you have those as well, then that goes to another conversation. So just I think that's an important piece that a lot of times goes overlooked. It's like, hey, y'all need to vet us as well, and then let's have that conversation. And that makes, if you do get quote unquote married, that makes it much more excitable, because now you know that you are equally yoked, equally aligned from a business perspective.
Great points from both of the panelists there. I guess, Kelly, what I would add is kind of a work backwards approach. Angie mentioned earlier a lot of the trade shows with NMSDC and WeBank and Novoba and those organizations. So I created a form with the input of my main stakeholders. So I'm switching from my DE&I to my supply diversity hat now. So really speaking to the category managers and saying, hey, what are the minimum qualifications that you all are looking for with these diverse partners, whether it's capacity, safety record, if it's construction, what is your niche, right? For these particular vendors. And then once they've registered for me, they don't necessarily go into some database, but we can actually search by that specific information that I was able to gather at those conferences. So when we get to the process of, okay, there's a procurement opportunity that comes up, half of the work is done, and it's a lot easier to get a yes for them to have an opportunity, opposed to, oh, well, are they going to be qualified? Can they handle this work? Well, you know what? We already had that conversation, and all of these people on this short list that I provided to you meet all the qualifications that you said were necessary. So that's kind of my approach to the vetting process.
Such great advice. I really appreciate how practical you all are being in this conversation. And I'm going to double click a little bit on some of the things that Simeon shared about. It's a two-way street, right? And it's, both parties really need to do that evaluation process. Over the last 8 years, Caris has worked with dozens and dozens of organizations, from small to Fortune 100. And I can count on less than one hand, thankfully. I only need like 2 or 3 fingers to do this within an 8-year period of time. But there have been like 2, maybe 3 times in 8 years where where we didn't listen to the data around that SWOT analysis in terms of a client not being the right fit. And our desire to serve and to help support an organization, we said yes to some partnerships that did not seem right going into it. But we knew that there was a lot on the line, and we were really just trying to be sort of servant leaders in that moment. And it didn't go well. We were not able to follow our standard practices with our onboarding process. And then in one instance, we had a client who did not listen to our advice. And unfortunately, what we indicated would likely happen, happened. And so that program was labeled a failure. And Caris, the vendor, was labeled as the person or the entity who created the failure, right? But at the end of the day, we predicted the outcome based on our experience, our expertise, and the client chose not to listen, and we moved forward. So we own that, right, for moving forward. And so I really want to share that, because I don't know if clients always recognize that when you're working with diverse vendors or small businesses, oftentimes we do want a chance and we do want to add value. But there are times when that two-way partnership of really listening to the counsel that we're providing, I think that there's an opportunity to make sure that there's a shared ownership in we win together. And if we happen to maybe fail, we're going to have to fail together. And if that's not something that is a shared value, then I think that that's something for both parties to consider and to think about. And I share that story very vulnerably and transparently, because I want us to wrap up the conversation of what do we do if the partnership goes wrong? What if it's almost like an epic fail? How do we course correct? What do we do to recover? I think we will start with Simeon on this one.
So I'm gonna come from perspective again from my industry, because as I was thinking you were talking, there's so many things that go involved into selecting a partner, because sometimes it may be political on our end, depending on what market we're in. Sometimes it may be, hey, we need to partner with this person because they partner with our competition. That's going to give them the edge. So sometimes some of the things that I talked about, we may kind of do a blind eye to certain things. So just full disclosure, just being transparent, because I've been in those situations. But I think, and leading into my response to that is, when things do go awry, again, it's kind of like in safety, in our industry in safety, you do a root cause analysis, right? You try to understand what was the main gist of that. Was this a one-time thing? Was this a situational ordeal? Is it personalities from a confliction standpoint? Or is it hey, this particular project or job that we're on and some of the other external forces that kind of cause or shape this particular situation? Or is it just, like you said earlier, hey, we saw some things and we ignored them, and they just did not line up. So I think that's first and foremost, is really understanding what was the cause of that, not just, hey, this just didn't work and whatever, because we've had some situations where we had a project or two and it didn't work, but then there was others that, this was a good fit, or maybe it was that particular team, so with personnel. So I think that's one of the things is really just kind of going through and understanding, and then again, sitting down and having that communication and dialogue of, is this something that we can work through once you identify and kind of agree on what that root cause was, and then putting together a strategic plan in the future with, hey, next time maybe we can't have these two together, or maybe this particular owner. Again, our industry, there's so many variables, and there's never one thing that's always the same from a consistency standpoint, because we do work across the country and things like that. But I think that's one of the key things is getting that root cause down, and then whatever that may be. I know it's kind of more of a general answer, but really what that strategic alignment, look like. What would success look like now that we've had this conversation? What could we have done now that we've had this conversation? Would it made a change or what have you? And then kind of go from there.
Yeah, so critical, Simeon, that I like what you're saying about the root cause analysis as that kind of postmortem debrief, because that's shared partnership, even during a difficult situation or difficult circumstances, really making sure that the partnership continues, the communication continues, even when something has gone awry. So I'm going to come to Angie, and then I'll have Tiffany wrap us up.
Thank you, Kelly. So just honestly, we are still defining this process at my company, but I say that we have learned a lot from projects that maybe have not gone well in the future to just start this vendor off on a much smaller project. So maybe we gave them the whole project, and then in the future we're like, well, maybe, you know, they can't handle our bandwidth, and that's okay. We can give them a much smaller portion and see how they work up to a larger bandwidth. But I did have a conversation recently because I reach out to a lot of my colleagues that are in supplier diversity just to get like their experience. And she is the supplier diversity manager of a large consulting firm. And she just told me that, you know, you just need to tell them, like be direct, just tell them why it's not working. Do that link between the vendor and the company. You know, they deserve to know, and that's how they can actually improve. They can't improve if they don't actually have the information in front of them, just to know what went well and what didn't. So that's what I'm trying to work towards that. Thank you.
Yeah, all great responses, Angie, Simeon, the follow-up conversation, being straightforward, going after the root cause. And I think for me, it's always kind of a self-reflection, right? Kelly, you told a story about the vendor kind of, or the contractor that you worked with blaming you for the problem when they didn't listen. So, you know, I'm first going to look at, did we provide all of the resources that we had listed in the initial agreement with this vendor? And then especially with DE&I vendors, I think for me being a supplier diversity professional, did we give them the same support and the same opportunities to course correct as my other non-diverse vendors? And then also sometimes I have to remind stakeholders, hey, you know, they always want to use the excuse of, oh, they're small, they're new. Well, your nested vendor was new at some point in time, right? So we need to give them the support and the action plan to correct. And also sometimes, very much like in the construction world, you have to do projects in phases. So we may need to end this particular scope, close it out, and let's just start off with a new contract with new rules of engagement, a new communication matrix, and expectations for performance to course correct, just kind of start the slate clean. So those would be a few of my suggestions.
Such great advice, so comprehensive. I am super grateful for all of you for lending your expertise and words of wisdom, those best practice strategies that you've learned over the years. For those of you who are tuning in and you're on LinkedIn in the chat, I hope that you will leave a post of appreciation to our panelists, Angie, Simeon, and Tiffany. Such fantastic information for all of us. And I want to just invite everybody to connect with Karis using the QR code here, subscribe to the 24 Karis podcast, as well as our blog. We'll continue to bring these important conversations that really help organizations and individuals live out their values around DEIB 24/7. So stay tuned for more great content. And again, thanks so much for tuning in. Have a great day.